Stars Beyond the Monolith, Chapter 7, The Echoes Between Worlds. The signal arrived with a kind of mathematical elegance that made Princess Parker sit up straighter at her station. It had been 3 days since the atmospheric fracture closed, 3 days of the planet settling back into its careful, hopeful recovery, 3 days of the Parker holding its patient orbit, while the family processed what Cassandra's first true leadership test had taught all of them. The ship had settled too, the specific, comfortable rhythm of a community that had weathered something and come out the other side intact. Then the deep scan arrays caught something new. "This is different from the first signal," Princess said, pulling the waveform up on the main display. "Look at the repetition structure. It's not organic distress encoding. It's precise, mathematically precise, repeating at intervals that follow a consistent sequence." Cassandra crossed the bridge to look at it. She had been different since the fracture incident, not dramatically, but in the specific settled way of someone who had been handed real responsibility and had carried it successfully. Mary had noticed it. Everyone had noticed it. Cassandra herself was still discovering exactly what it meant. "It reads as a distress beacon," Cassandra said, studying the pattern. "It does," Princess agreed. "The structure is consistent with universal emergency protocols, but there's something about the precision that feels—" She paused, searching for the word. "Old." "Source location?" Mary asked from the command chair. "A moon," Princess sighed, "orbiting Argosgeon approximately 6 hours from our current position. There's an extensive settlement signature. Buildings, infrastructure, the architectural footprint of what looks like a substantial population." Cassandra was already building the case in her mind, the way she had learned to build cases over the past weeks of expanding responsibility. "If there's a population in distress," she said, "we need to respond." Mary looked at her granddaughter for a moment. "Build the mission plan," she said. "I'll review it before we commit the frames." The empty colony, the settlement that greeted them on the moon's surface, was extraordinary in scale, and, within minutes of arrival, extraordinary in its silence. Cassandra had built her entire approach around expecting a population in crisis. What the Cyber Viper's sensors found instead was a city without people, towers that had once housed thousands standing in the specific, undisturbed stillness of structures that nothing had touched in a very long time. No power signatures beyond the beacon itself, no communication traffic, no movement, no heat signatures, no evidence of any living population at all. "This doesn't match the projection," Cassandra said, looking at the dead city stretching below the Cyber Viper's hovering position. "It's beautiful," Princess said quietly, looking at the same view through the Oracle's sensor feed, "and it's completely abandoned. The signal is still active, though," Cassandra said, "which means somebody's maintaining it, or something is." Amira's voice cut through the channel with its characteristic bluntness. "I don't trust ghost signals. A beacon broadcasting from a dead city is either a malfunction or bait, and I've watched enough things in this universe to know which one I'd bet on." "It's not bait," Cassandra said, quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. "There's no hostile architecture here, no defensive systems. This is exactly the kind of situation that requires a response, not suspicion." Amin, who had been running reconnaissance through the city's outer districts in the vanguard, spoke for the first time in several minutes. "The environment is untouched," he said. "No signs of conflict, no signs of evacuation under duress. Whatever happened here happened a long time ago, and it happened quietly." Cassandra absorbed this without letting it shift her focus. "The beacon is the priority," she said. "If there's even a small chance someone needs help, we don't ignore it because the surrounding evidence is unusual." It was, she would understand only later, the first sign of the mistake she was already making. The 5-frame search. The Aegis, Mary Parker. Mary held a central position above the settlement's primary square, her presence serving as the operation's anchor point, the place every other frame could orient toward, the steady center around which the investigation moved. She watched. She listened to the coordination channel, and she noticed, with the specific quality of attention she had spent her long life refining, the particular intensity with which Cassandra was approaching the signal. She said nothing yet. This was Cassandra's mission to run. Mary had learned in the weeks since the fracture that the most valuable thing she could sometimes offer her granddaughter was the space to make her own discoveries, including, when necessary, the space to make her own mistakes. The vanguard. Amin Parker. Amin moved through the city's most inaccessible regions, collapsed structures, underground transit systems long since lost power. The specific architectural margins that held information nobody had thought to preserve deliberately. He found details. He reported them simply, without elaboration, the way he reported everything. "Structural decay suggests approximately 3,000 years of abandonment," he said. "Possibly more. The materials here weren't built to last this long without maintenance. They've held remarkably well." Cassandra received the data and filed it without fully weighing what it meant. The Cyber Viper, Cassandra Brown. She was tracing the beacon's exact source, and finding with increasing frustration that the source appeared to move, not dramatically, not in a way that suggested anything was physically relocating, But the signal's point of origin shifted by small increments each time she attempted to triangulate it precisely, a behavior that should have been impossible for a stationary transmitter, and that she found herself working harder and harder to explain away rather than fully investigate. It's degraded, she said to herself, to the channel. 3,000 years of signal drift, that's all this is. It was a reasonable hypothesis. It was also, she would later admit, the explanation she had reached for because it preserved her original assumption, rather than the explanation the data most directly supported. The Oracle, Princess Parker. Princess was the first to notice the inconsistency that mattered. "Cassandra," she said, studying the signal's deep structure with the Oracle's full analytical capacity. "The information encoded in this beacon, the data structure beneath the basic distress pattern, it's old, genuinely old. The encoding conventions match historical patterns from approximately the same era Amin is finding in the architecture. So the civilization that built this was sending distress signals 3,000 years ago," Cassandra said. "That's consistent with everything else we're seeing." "That's not quite what I'm saying," Princess said carefully. "I'm saying the signal might have been sent 3,000 years ago, not that it's still being sent." Cassandra heard this. She did not, in the moment, fully absorb it. "If it was sent 3,000 years ago and we're receiving it now," she said, "then it's an automated system that's still running, which means whatever caused the original distress could theoretically still be relevant. We don't dismiss a call for help because of its age." Princess was quiet for a moment. "I think that's right," she said, though her voice carried the specific, careful quality of someone who wasn't entirely certain and was choosing for now to trust her niece's confidence over her own emerging doubt. The forge. Amira Campbell. Amira had found her way into one of the settlement's largest structures, a building whose architecture suggested some combination of archive and civic centre. "Its systems dead, but its physical infrastructure remarkably intact," she began, "restoring power to isolated sections. The forge's engineering capabilities exactly suited to coaxing dormant systems back into limited function, without risking the structure's integrity. I'm getting partial records," she reported, after 20 minutes of careful work. "Historical archives, it looks like. Massive amounts of data. I can't read most of it yet, but the storage architecture is intact." "Send what you can," Cassandra said. "Right now I need to find whoever or whatever sent that beacon." Amira looked at the readout for a moment longer than the response required. "You sure that's the priority?" she said. "It's the priority," Cassandra said. The mistake compounds. Over the following 2 hours, Cassandra's focus on the beacon narrowed in exactly the way that focus sometimes narrows, when someone has invested significant confidence in a particular interpretation of events. She redirected sensor resources from broader environmental analysis towards signal triangulation. She asked Princess to prioritize the Oracle's processing power on tracking the beacon's apparent drift, rather than continuing the historical pattern analysis that had already surfaced one important inconsistency. She kept Amin's reconnaissance focused on potential physical structures that might house the transmitter, rather than the broader question of what had actually happened to the civilization. None of these decisions were unreasonable in isolation. Together, they represented a mission shape that had stopped asking, "What is this signal, actually?" and had started asking only, "Where is the signal, exactly?" A subtle but significant difference that Cassandra, 3 weeks into her first real experience with command authority, did not yet have the seasoning to notice in herself. Mari noticed it. She continued to say nothing. "I think I'm close," Cassandra said, after the 3rd hour, her triangulation models converging on a specific structure near the settlement's centre. The signal's apparent drift correlates with atmospheric interference patterns specific to this moon's magnetic field. If I correct for that, the source resolves to a single building. "Sending Vanguard," Amin said immediately. He reached the building within minutes. A modest structure, unremarkable compared to the towers around it, its interior preserved with the same careful stillness as everything else's in the dead city. At its centre, a transmitter. Small, ancient, still, somehow, functioning. "Found it," Amin reported. Cassandra felt the specific, satisfying relief of a hypothesis confirmed. It lasted exactly as long as it took Princess to finish the analysis she had been quietly continuing in the background, despite the redirected priorities, because some part of her had not been able to fully let go of the inconsistency she'd flagged 3 hours earlier. "Cassandra," Princess said, "I need you to look at this before anyone touches that transmitter." The discovery. "The beacon was a distress call," Princess said, her voice carrying the specific, careful gentleness of someone delivering information she knew would be difficult to retrieve. 3,000 years ago, it absolutely was. This civilization experienced some kind of catastrophic event. The data doesn't fully specify what, but it was severe enough to trigger an automated emergency broadcast protocol across their entire settlement network. "And the transmitter is still active," Cassandra said. "Which means, it means the protocol never received a shutdown command," Princess said. "Because there was nobody left to send one. The civilization that built this beacon is gone, Cassandra. Not evacuated, not relocated. Gone. In the way civilizations sometimes simply end. The beacon has been transmitting the same distress call, unattended, for 3,000 years, because nothing ever told it to stop. The channel was quiet. There's no one to rescue, Amin said, simply, confirming what Princess's data had already made clear. Cassandra sat with this. The mission she had built, the confidence she had carried into every decision over the past 3 hours, the specific narrowing of focus that had felt, in the moment, like decisive leadership. All of it had been constructed around an interpretation that the evidence had been quietly contradicting since the very first hour. I missed it, she said, quietly, to the channel, to her family, to herself. Aunt Princess flagged the inconsistency early. I didn't follow it. I kept building the case I'd already decided was true instead of testing whether it actually was. Nobody responded immediately. We spent an entire mission, Cassandra continued, on a crisis that ended 3,000 years before we got here. Mary's lesson. Mary brought the Aegis down beside the building where Amin had found the transmitter and walked the short distance to where her granddaughter had gathered with the rest of the team, Princess and Amira arriving from their own positions, the 5 of them standing together in the dead city's silent square. I wasted everyone's time, Cassandra said before Mary could speak. I should have listened to the inconsistencies instead of pushing past them. Mary looked at her for a long moment. Did you? She said. Did I what? Waste everyone's time? Cassandra looked at the building, at the transmitter inside it, at the dead city around them, holding 3,000 years of silence that nobody had been listening for until today. We didn't help anyone, she said. There was nothing to help. That's not the same question, Mary said. Listen carefully, because this is one of the most important things you'll ever learn, and I'd rather you learn it from me than from a harder teacher. She looked around at the settlement. Helping people is important. It is, perhaps, the most important thing we do. But understanding the truth is equally important, sometimes more important, because the truth is what lets you help correctly the next time. There's nobody to help here, Cassandra said. No, Mary agreed. But there's an entire civilization whose existence we didn't know about 3 hours ago. There's a historical archive your aunt and your cousin found that may contain knowledge worth more than any single rescue. There's a pattern. Beacons, distress calls, civilizations that vanished, that might connect to everything else this family has been encountering since we answered the very first call. She put her hand on Cassandra's shoulder. You didn't fail today. You learned something today. Those are different things, and the difference matters more than you currently believe it does. Cassandra absorbed this slowly. I was so certain, she said. I know, Mary said. Certainty is useful. It's also dangerous when it stops you from hearing the people who are telling you something different. She glanced at Princess. Your aunt told you something today. You heard her. You didn't listen to her. There's a difference, and learning it is most of what leadership actually is. The archive. While the family processed the larger lesson, Princess and Amira returned to the archive Amira had partially restored, and what they found there reframed the entire mission's meaning. This isn't just this civilization's history, Princess said, working through the recovered records with growing wonder. There are references here to dozens of other civilizations. Some I can partially identify from fragments in our own database. Most I've never encountered at all. Amira, running the Forge's restoration systems through another isolated section, pulled up a series of records that made her stop entirely. Princess, she said, look at this. The records described, in fragments damaged by 3,000 years of decay, but still unmistakably legible, in their core meaning, ancient travers, beings who had moved between worlds long before the civilization had built its first transmitter, long before humanity had looked up at its own sky and wondered what was beyond it, and scattered throughout every fragment the same symbol repeated, the monolith. Not one, Princess said, looking at the pattern across dozens of separate records. Multiple, different locations, different references. This isn't a single place. It's a network. Cassandra came to stand beside them, looking at the data with the specific, focused attention that had defined her entire approach to the day, chastened now, but not diminished. If anything, sharper. How many monoliths? She said. Princess ran the count. Minimum, she said. 14 distinct locations referenced across these records, possibly more. Some of the fragments are too damaged to fully resolve. Cassandra looked at the star map Princess pulled up, the 14 locations marking themselves across a region of space far larger than anything the Parker had yet charted, far larger than the hundreds of distress signals Amira had discovered in the previous archive. This was something else, something older, something connecting every world they had encountered since the very first rescue, threading through ancient guardian networks and abandoned colonies and ruins that weren't ruins at all, but components of something vast and deliberate that none of them yet understood. We're not looking at isolated worlds anymore, Cassandra said, slowly. We're looking at a system. Something built this, something connected all of it. She looked at the 14 points on the map. I don't know what the monolith actually is, she said. Not yet, but I think understanding that question is bigger than any single rescue we've run so far. Mary, standing behind her, said nothing. She didn't need to. Cassandra Brown was beginning for the first time to think not like a pilot solving the immediate problem in front of her, but like someone responsible for understanding the entire shape of what was coming. It was, Mary thought, exactly the lesson the day had been meant to teach. That evening, back aboard the Parker, Cassandra stood alone in the Cyber Viper's cockpit, long after the mission debrief had ended, looking at the star map now glowing with 14 marked locations, stretching into territory the family had never imagined exploring. She thought about the beacon, about the certainty that had carried her past the evidence that should have stopped her, about her grandmother's patient. Exact correction, not punishment, but teaching. The specific kind of teaching that only worked because it trusted the person receiving it to actually grow from it. She thought about 14 monoliths, and the question of how many more might exist beyond what one damaged archive had managed to preserve. She did not yet know what came next, but for the first time, she understood that not knowing wasn't a failure of leadership. It was where leadership actually began. End of chapter 7. The echoes between worlds. ESTRELLAS más allá del monolito. Capítulo 13. Los ecos entre mundos. La señal llegó con una elegancia matemática que hizo que Princess Parker se enderezara en su estación. Habían pasado 3 días desde que la fractura atmosférica se cerró, 3 días del planeta asentándose de vuelta en su cuidadosa y esperanzadora recuperación, 3 días del Parker manteniendo su órbita paciente, mientras la familia procesaba lo que la primera prueba de liderazgo real de Cassandra les había enseñado a todos. La nave también se había asentado, el ritmo específico y cómodo de una comunidad que había superado algo y había salido intacta del otro lado. Entonces los arrays de escaneo profundo captaron algo nuevo. Esto es diferente de la primera señal, dijo Princess, mostrando la forma de onda en la pantalla principal. Mira la estructura de repetición. No es codificación de socorro orgánica. Es precisa. Matemáticamente precisa. Cassandra cruzó el puente para verla. Había sido diferente desde el incidente de la fractura. No dramáticamente, sino de la manera específica y asentada de alguien a quien se le había dado responsabilidad real y la había llevado con éxito. Se lee como una baliza de socorro, dijo Cassandra, estudiando el patrón. Así es, coincidió Princess. Pero hay algo en la precisión que se siente. Hizo una pausa, buscando la palabra. Antiguo. ¿Ubicación de la fuente? Preguntó Mary, desde la silla de mando. Una luna, dijo Princess, orbitando un gigante gaseoso a aproximadamente 6 horas de nuestra posición actual, hay una firma de asentamiento extensa. Construye el plan de misión, dijo Mary. Lo revisaré antes de comprometer los frames. La colonia vacía, el asentamiento que los recibió en la superficie de la luna, era extraordinario en escala y, dentro de minutos de la llegada, extraordinario en su silencio. Cassandra había esperado una población en crisis. Lo que los sensores del Cyber Viper encontraron en su lugar fue una ciudad sin gente. Esto no coincide con la proyección, dijo Cassandra, mirando la ciudad muerta debajo de la posición flotante del Cyber Viper. Es hermosa, dijo Princess, suavemente, y está completamente abandonada. No confío en señales fantasma, dijo Amira a través del canal. Una baliza transmitiendo desde una ciudad muerta es o un mal funcionamiento o una trampa. No es una trampa, dijo Cassandra, rápidamente, quizás demasiado rápido. No hay arquitectura hostil aquí. Eamon, que había estado haciendo reconocimiento a través de los distritos exteriores de la ciudad en el Vanguard, habló por primera vez en varios minutos. El entorno está intacto, dijo, sin señales de conflicto, sin señales de evacuación bajo coacción. Lo que sea que pasó aquí pasó hace mucho tiempo, y pasó silenciosamente. Cassandra absorbió esto sin dejar que cambiara su enfoque. La baliza es la prioridad, dijo. Si hay incluso una pequeña posibilidad de que alguien necesite ayuda, no la ignoramos, porque la evidencia circundante es inusual. Era, entendería solo después, la primera señal del Iroquois. Ya estaba cometiendo la búsqueda de los 5 frames alleges. Mary Parker. Mary mantuvo una posición central sobre la plaza principal del asentamiento, su presencia sirviendo como el punto de anclaje de la operación. Observó, escuchó el canal de coordinación y notó, con la calidad específica de atención que había pasado su larga vida refinando, la intensidad particular con la que Cassandra se acercaba a la señal. Todavía no dijo nada. El Vanguard, Eamon Parker. El deterioro estructural sugiere aproximadamente 3000 años de abandono, dijo. Posiblemente más. Cassandra recibió los datos y los archivó sin sopesar completamente lo que significaban. El Cyber Viper, Cassandra Brown, estaba rastreando la fuente exacta de la baliza y encontrando, con frustración creciente, que la fuente parecía moverse. Está degradada, dijo, para sí misma, para el canal. 3000 años de deriva de señal. Eso es todo lo que es. Era una hipótesis razonable. También era, admitiré después, la explicación que había buscado, porque preservaba su suposición original, en lugar de la explicación que los datos respaldaban más directamente. El oráculo, Princess Parker Cassandra, dijo, estudiando la estructura profunda de la señal, la información codificada en esta baliza, Es antigua, genuinamente antigua. Entonces, la civilización que construyó esto estaba enviando señales de socorro hace 3000 años, dijo Cassandra. No es exactamente lo que estoy diciendo, dijo Princess, cuidadosamente. Estoy diciendo que la señal podría haber sido enviada hace 3000 años, no que todavía esté siendo enviada. Cassandra escuchó esto. No lo absorbió completamente en el momento. La fragua, Amira Campbell. Estoy obteniendo registros parciales, repotó. Archivos históricos, parece. Cantidades masivas de datos. Envía lo que puedas, dijo Cassandra. Ahora necesito encontrar a quien sea que envió esa baliza. ¿Segura que esa es la prioridad? Dijo Amirath. Es la prioridad, dijo Cassandra. El error se agrava. Durante las siguientes 2 horas, el enfoque de Cassandra en la baliza se estrechó exactamente de la manera en que el enfoque a veces se estrecha, cuando alguien ha invertido confianza significativa en una interpretación particular de los eventos. Creo que estoy cerca, dijo Cassandra, después de la tercera hora. ¿Se corrigió eso? La fuente se resuelve en un solo edificio. Enviando al Vanguard, dijo Amin inmediatamente. Lo encontré, reportó Amin. Cassandra sintió el alivio específico y satisfactorio de una hipótesis confirmada. Duró exactamente el tiempo que le tomó a Princess terminar el análisis que había estado continuando silenciosamente en el fondo. Cassandra dijo a Princess, necesito que veas esto antes de que alguien toque ese transmisor. El descubrimiento. La baliza era un llamado de socorro, dijo Princess. Hace 3000 años, absolutamente lo era. Esta civilización experimentó algún tipo de evento catastrófico. Y el transmisor todavía está activo, dijo Cassandra, lo que significa que el protocolo nunca recibió un comando de apagado, dijo Princess. ¿Por qué no quedó nadie para enviarlo? La civilización que construyó esta baliza se ha ido, Cassandra. No evacuada, no reubicada, se ha ido. No hay nadie que rescatar, dijo Amin. Simplemente. Cassandra se quedó con esto. Lo perdí, dijo, silenciosamente. La tía Princess marcó la inconsistencia temprano. No la seguí. La lección de Mary. Desperdicié el tiempo de todos, dijo Cassandra, antes de que Mary pudiera hablar. Mary la miró por un largo momento. Lo hiciste, dijo. Ayudar a las personas es importante, dijo Mary. Es, quizás, lo más importante que hacemos, pero entender la verdad es igualmente importante. A veces más importante, porque la verdad es lo que te permite ayudar correctamente la próxima vez. No hay nadie a quien ayudar aquí, dijo Cassandra. No, coincidió Mary, pero hay toda una civilización cuya existencia no conocíamos hace 3 horas. Hay un archivo histórico que tu tía y tu prima encontraron. Puso su mano en el hombro de Cassandra. No fallaste hoy. Aprendiste algo hoy. Esas son cosas diferentes. Estaba tan segura, dijo Cassandra. Lo sé, dijo Mary. La certeza es útil. También es peligrosa cuando te impide escuchar a las personas que te están diciendo algo diferente. El archivo. Esto no es solo la historia de esta civilización, dijo Princess, trabajando a través de los registros recuperados, con creciente asombro. Hay referencias aquí a docenas de otras civilizaciones. Amira se detuvo por completo. Princess, dijo, mira esto. Los registros describían a antiguos viajeros, seres que se habían movido entre mundos mucho antes de que esta civilización construyera su primer transmisor, y esparcido por todo fragmento, el mismo símbolo repetido, el monolito. No uno, dijo Princess, mirando el patrón a través de docenas de registros separados. Múltiples, diferentes ubicaciones. Esto no es un solo lugar, es una red. Cassandra vino a pararse a su lado. ¿Cuántos monolitos? Dijo. Como mínimo, dijo Princess. 14 ubicaciones distintas referenciadas en estos registros. Cassandra miró el mapa estelar que Princess había mostrado. Las 14 ubicaciones, marcándose a través de una región del espacio mucho más grande que cualquier cosa que el Parker hubiera cartografiado hasta ahora. No estamos mirando mundos aislados más, dijo Cassandra lentamente. Estamos mirando un sistema. Algo construyó esto. Algo lo conectó todo. Mary, parada detrás de ella, no dijo nada. No necesitaba hacerlo. Cassandra Brown estaba comenzando, por primera vez, a pensar no como una piloto resolviendo el problema inmediato frente a ella, sino como alguien responsable de entender toda la forma de lo que venía. Esa noche, de vuelta a bordo del Parker, Cassandra estaba sola en la cabina del Cyber Viper mucho después de que terminara el informe de la misión, mirando el mapa estelar ahora brillando con 14 ubicaciones marcadas. Pensó en la baliza, en la certeza que la había llevado más allá de la evidencia, que debería haberla detenido, en la corrección paciente y exacta de su abuela. No sabía todavía qué seguía, pero por primera vez entendió que no saber no era un fallo de liderazgo. Era donde el liderazgo realmente comenzaba. Fin del capítulo 7. Los ecos entre mundos.